Welcome to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Portugal. My name is Ana Paula Zacarias and I am the Director of the Diplomatic Institute. In the context of Portugal's candidature to the UN Security Council, I have the pleasure of hosting a series of conversations with Portuguese high officials with a large experience of work in the United Nations. Together, we will discuss the main pillars of Portugal foreign policy. We will talk about multilateralism, about the United Nations, and also we will discuss and explore ideas and priorities that would guide Portugal's contribution to the work of the Security Council. Today, I have with me Miguel Serpa Soares. Welcome. He was a former Under-Secretary General and the United Nations Legal Counsel and former legal advisor here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Beyond his passion for international law, Miguel has dedicated much of his life to the question of oceans and the law of the sea. He was the focal point of UN Ocean and special advisor to the UN Ocean Conference and Secretary General of the diplomatic conference that had successfully negotiated the new BBNJ treaty. In the UN, he has developed within DOALOS a large number of capacity building programs in the field of ocean affairs. He is a strong and passionate advocate for the seas and a member of the Scientific Council of the Institut du Droit de la Mer de Monaco. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon, Miguel. And I really would like to ask you that, taking into account your large experience with the UN, how do you feel about the current international context? The UN is 80 years old. Is the UN still relevant, is still alive, and is reform needed?
Absolutely, yes. So, there's a lot of perceptions about the crisis in multilateralism and international organizations, and that comes along with this period of upheaval where we have the feeling that the world is changing fast, and we don't understand very well where it's heading to. But the multilateral proposal, the multilateral option is there because it's a necessity. It's not optional. And it will be more and more a necessity because states alone, they cannot deal with the most fundamental issues that will affect our societies for the next 20 years, be it disarmament or climate change or migrations. So even if we see certain parts of the multilateral action and the United Nations not delivering as we expected, and this is mostly the case of the peace and security pillar, other areas of multilateralism and other areas of activity of the UN are working quite well. But we don't talk about the things that are working quite well. Now, reform, I think reform is always necessary. The first book I've seen about the United Nations reform was written in 1949. So since the beginning,
time ago.
The world is very dynamic, the United Nations is very dynamic, and we have to understand that.
Absolutely. So multilateralism makes sense. Multilateralism needs to be preserved. As you were saying, we cannot solve problems alone, individually, each member state. Plus, most of these issues, these challenges that you mentioned, they are interconnected. There
Absolutely.
is an interconnection between security, climate change, migration, new technologies, development. So we need to look at this in an integrated form, right? And on that, the Secretary General has mentioned on many occasions this question of the triple planetary threat, where climate change, ocean decline, and loss of biodiversity combine. What is the international community doing on this, particularly the United Nations?
Yeah. Well, that threat is real, and actually it relates to the entire way we humans relate to nature. And we need to have a fresh look into this, having in mind that there is no planet B. So we are in this natural space. We have changed our relationship with nature, and we're seeing more and more, like we did see last week in Portugal, a very, very extreme weather phenomena and so on. So for the United Nations and the international community, the United Nations framework on climate change remains the main pillar of action, and that was complemented in 2015 by the Paris Agreement, all the different commitments that member states have taken collectively. This is known. But not only that, for oceans in particular, when we were discussing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, Portugal was very vocal in defining a specific goal for oceans. It's called Life Underwater. Is
SDG 14.
14, which is a very, very dear SDG to me. And we were very vocal about that. So there is a specific chapter in the 2030 Agenda for the preservation of ocean life. But not only. I wanted to give you also the example of the United Nations Oceans Conferences. And people may think, no, this is only another conference, but this gathering of experts, governments from the entire world, this is very meaningful. The Lisbon second United Nations conference in Lisbon, which had around 7,000 delegates. The outcome was a very political, robust political declaration. Yes. So that was an important contribution. The new BBNJ treaty, or Treaty on Biodiversity Beyond Areas of National Jurisdiction, which was adopted in 2023. That was a very important landmark in the international legal architecture for nature protection. It was very welcome because it took 20 years to negotiate, and it came in a period where people were already questioning multilateralism and the possibility of member states agreeing on anything major. And in spite of the complicated name, BBNJ, this is a major treaty in the sense...
Can you explain, what does it mean, BBNJ?
Yes, it means literally biodiversity beyond areas of national jurisdiction. So you can just call it the high seas. So the sovereignty and the jurisdiction of states on the seas is defined by the land. So, for instance, in Portugal, we have a number of nautical miles from the coastline, which is our territorial waters, and after that comes the exclusive economic zone, and so on and so on. But outside these coastal areas, there's a huge ocean that belongs to
everybody.
To everybody. That's the point.
Yeah.
And that's different saying it belongs to everybody than saying belongs to anybody. And so this is exactly the object of this treaty. And it had many, many different objectives. How to preserve ocean life in these open spaces, these sort of global commons, how to ensure that there was a fair sharing of benefits from the exploitation of, for instance, marine genetic resources, and scientific research is only starting. We know about 5% of sea species, and already now we're producing new, very sophisticated drugs derived from marine genetic resources, like new drugs for cancer and so on. And this is already a reality. But we have to ensure, because all this life, all this richness does not belong to anyone, that everyone, meaning all states, can enjoy the benefits of this. Also, it's very, very strong in nature conservancy, because we have marine protected areas, management of marine protected areas. So it's actually a very sophisticated treaty, but it's a big step forward in the preservation of oceans and of nature. So this was a very important treaty.
So it also has a connection with the third element or the third challenge that we mentioned. So we mentioned climate change, we mentioned the ocean decline, but we also mentioned biodiversity.
Absolutely.
There is a connection between this treaty and also the preservation of biodiversity as a whole, right?
And also on biodiversity, we had some good progress. The Kunming-Montreal commitment to preserve 30% of species until 2030. That was 2023 also. There are some progresses, but the main idea that I think comes through this statement of the triple planetary crisis is that more and more there is awareness that these realities are not silos and that they're interdependent, and in order to tackle climate change effectively, we also have to tackle
The
ocean resilience and loss of biodiversity. So it is this idea of holistic approach of all these three different pillars that is shaping up in the last 10 years, and now there's full awareness that we have to deal with these three different realities in an holistic manner at the same time.
Talking about holistic, how do we connect this with the security agenda? Because we're talking about preservation, it's very important. We're talking about the ocean, we're talking about climate, we're talking about biodiversity. But how does this relate with the security agenda? Is there a relation?
Absolutely. Let's reason first in geographic terms. So in our planet, 2/3 are water, 2/3 are the ocean. 90% of all international trade is done by water. And the oceans represent, I don't know, the livelihood of millions of people. Coastal communities, fishing, transport, tourism, you name it. Plus, throughout the ocean, we have very important and critical infrastructure. All our digital traffic is done through
By
cables. I mean,
yeah.
some of them
Submarine
very
cables,
importantly placed in Portugal, as we know. So that would be self-evident. Such a large space is also, further than an environmental reality, a security, also a strategic space. Now, climate change in itself would not be a challenge. The problem is that climate change, it accelerates a lot of other threats and other vulnerabilities that are already there. Because with climate change, a lot of coastal communities have to be moved. So you have forced migrations, you have decline in fish stocks, and therefore livelihoods of many communities are threatened. That produces insecurity, forced migrations. Also, the ocean is used for transnational crime, piracy. So there are so many aspects that when you look to this huge space and you see the link and the nexus between oceans and security. I mean, some are more evident, like piracy or drug trafficking. Others are less evident. But when you see all these factors as a multiplier and accelerator of other vulnerabilities, you understand that there is a dimension of
security,
peace and security to these discussions.
Yeah. So, as you know, Portugal is seeking to be elected for the biennium 27-28 for a non-permanent seat at the Security Council. Do you believe that we can bring something to this agenda, that there are specific things that Portugal can do to support this agenda, particularly in the sense that the Security Council does not need to become a climate body, but it cannot ignore climate and ocean-driven risks to peace, as you've mentioned. What can we bring?
Well, we can and we should, because there's a lot of work. I mean, Portugal is a maritime nation, and there's a lot of work developed in these areas. Another issue that I would like to bring in this connection with the Security Council is all the issue of sea level rise. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, sea level rise is a file where we had an important contribution, because the study done in the International Law Commission was co-chaired by a Portuguese colleague, Patricia Galvão-Teles, and the implications of the sea level rise in terms of international law are huge. When we think that statehood is defined by territory, population, and government, what do you do when the territory disappears or shrinks? What is the territory of this state? Where do the affected populations go? So I think the link with security is evident. So being aware of all this and having partnered for many years with many countries in maritime issues, particularly with the small island developing states, I think we are very aware of the implications in terms of security of these issues. We know we have work on them, and we are, of course, a very good ambassador of these discussions in the Security Council.
Very good. You also mentioned a very important theme, maritime security and piracy.
Yeah.
There too, what is the current agenda on this dossier, and can Portugal also bring some expertise and some added value to that agenda?
Yes, I think we have experience actually in this piracy issue, not only from a conceptual, legal, policy aspect, but operationally, because I don't know if you are aware, but our national navy was twice in charge of the naval operation off the coast of Somalia against piracy. So we have a direct implication of our military forces on this issue. But at the same time, we had an international group discussing the legal aspects of piracy. That was also at some point chaired by a Portuguese colleague, Mateus Kowalski.
Oh, Mateus was there.
Yeah.
Good.
So we have a lot of expertise and experience into that. I think that the problem is still there and it's expanding. So we used to have a very geographically limited zone where piracy was more intense, but now we're observing the same phenomenon in the Gulf of Guinea, in Southeast Asia. So that means that the problem is not going to disappear. It's more and more also linked with transnational crime, and the international community needs to take this phenomenon seriously and try to define collective action to counter it.
Yeah, because you also mentioned the cables, the relevance
Absolutely.
of the submarine cables, and the question of maritime security as a whole. For instance, we can see that now some of the traffic of drugs and also the traffic on people, on persons, are also passed by the ocean. This is also a very complex issue that we need to address in terms of security, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think that the Security Council is already sensitized to some of these topics, so it's not new in terms of what is the nexus with the security issues. The problems are not going to disappear, so we have to keep this discussion active. There's a lot of different United Nations agencies working in terms of ocean affairs. So all this has to be coordinated and transformed into concrete action to counter the problem.
We talked already about BBNJ Treaty and the relevance that it has in terms of the connection with the security agenda.
Absolutely.
And we talked also about the relevance of this for the prevention of conflicts, but also in terms of partnerships. And Portugal there has some experience, right?
We have expertise, we have experience, we have past work, and we have ongoing work. And under this model of partnerships, which is very important in our conception of our participation in the Security Council. I can give you specific examples. For instance, recently we have co-chaired with Antigua and Barbuda this multi-dimensional vulnerability index, which was just approved by the General Assembly. That was a specific example of partnership with the small island developing states. But also we have a specific program called the Portugal UN Fellowship, where we get very, very important help from the not-for-profit sector in Portugal, namely through the Oceano Azul Foundation. And this is a program designed specifically for small island developing states concerning ocean management, digitalization, and so
capacity
on.
building, basically.
It's purely capacity building all along. But also in the years 2022-2023, we have co-chaired with Samoa the UN Steering Committee on partnerships for the small island developing states. So there's a lot of experience there. I also would like to mention something that we were very recently part of the core group with Vanuatu in the General Assembly for the discussions of the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on the climate change. So we have to be, we were at the forefront of that discussion. And there are other examples that we're doing, for instance, our debt swaps for climate investments with Cabo Verde.
With Cabo Verde and now São Tomé.
We have a long list. We have a long list of projects that we're working with small island developing states. We have the experience, the expertise, and the commitment to carry on with those.
That's very good, because we talked about already about the question of prevention and the relevance of prevention in terms of this connection between the agenda of oceans, climate oceans agenda, and security. We now talked about partnerships. There is also the question of protection. And these three elements are very relevant because they are the core of the Portuguese candidature to the Security Council. Basically, how do you see this? How do you see this connection between prevent, partner, and protect?
I think they're part of the same reality. You cannot prevent properly without partnerships, and you cannot protect properly without prevention, and so on and so on. So they are faces of the same reality. And in the conversation we're having about oceans, all these aspects are very present. You protect nature, but you protect coastal communities and their livelihoods. You prevent further effects of climate change and ocean decline. And you partner with the local communities and with other states in order to achieve all these objectives together. In fact, I think oceans is a very good example of these three Ps. How can we pursue protection, prevention,
and partnerships.
And partnerships at the same time.
Some people say that protection is the human face of the planetary agenda.
Absolutely.
Protect is defend people, defend nature, and also defend the rules, because we are also talking about legislation at international level. That's what it is. The BBNJ is new piece of legislation that somehow will also represents the capacity of multilateralism to produce important legislation that can be
and that
relevant.
should be a good sign to all believers in multilateralism, that in spite of the death of multilateralism and international organizations being so repeated, in 2023, after 20 years of negotiation, the international community could still come together and adopt a very sophisticated text which has a huge impact in the protection of nature. So multilateral is still working for what states define as important matters.
Very good. And there was also the Pact for the Future that has all these elements in it also. So it means that multilateralism is alive.
It's alive, and it also relates to intergenerational solidarity, because if we keep in mind this idea that there is no planet B, at least for the moment, we are confined to this space, but also the future generations. And the state of the planet that we're going to leave for the next generations, I think it's a very relevant question, and it's a duty that the present generations have towards the future generation.
And that's also about security, right?
Security and prevention.
Exactly. So thank you very much, Miguel. Thank you for this very interesting conversation. So the strength of prevent, partner, protect is that it forms a cycle. Not just a slogan, I would say. So prevention reduces the need of force, partnership ensures legitimacy, ownership, sustainability, and protection anchors security in human dignity and development. Together, they can support conflict prevention, sustainable peace, and trust in the multilateral action. So thank you very much, Miguel. A pleasure. See you soon.
Thank you.